Among the many cleanup issues needed in Excel are ways to standardize the display of entries. If you look at the data in column B, those are all numbers, but we want them to be displayed as 6-character entries with leading zeros. If you were setting up the data, here's what you might consider doing. Suppose you were going to put this data in column A. You could simply right-click and go to Format Cells, or press Control-1 either way, and simply use a custom format of 6 zeros. And then as you make your entries, for example here, I'll type 757, what happens when I press Enter, and 44622, and that's going to happen all the way down the column if you were to use these kinds of numbers. And so that would take care of the issue from the start. However, we've got data here, and we want it to look like this. Now, by the way, the green triangles that you sometimes see here are not critical in this example, but you will see them unless you've turned off some of the settings. If you click the button to the left, it'll explain why it's there. The number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. That doesn't really bother us now, nor should it concern us. If you were to print the data, you won't see these either. If you'd like to not show these, if you find them annoying, then go to the File menu, choose Options, and then in this dialog box, choose Formulas, and then consider unchecking the boxes that might have caused those green triangles to appear. And so over time, you might want to revisit this particular group of error-checking rules. A lot of them are not really errors. They're just warnings to you. So, for example here, if we don't want to see inconsistent calculated column formulas in a table, that's usually not a big issue. We can uncheck that box. The one we just saw, numbers formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe, that isn't necessarily wrong, but if we don't want to see the indicator, we can turn that off. So you can make changes to the display there. Now, column B is all numerical entries. So one way to clean this up, and let's say we get rid of these and use a function that's going to allow us to do this. It's called text. I'll make the column a bit wider so you can see it more clearly. Equal text. We click a cell that has a value right here, comma, then we provide a format for it. We want all the entries, not only in cell B2, but all the other ones, because we're going to be copying this, to be 6 characters. So the format we use, not exactly obvious, 6 zeros. We'll complete that. We see how that's being displayed. Double click, we see how the others are. Now the column might or might not be centered. That's not the issue, and we can certainly change that if we wish, and then readjust it that way. The function in question, text, simply pulls in the information from an adjacent cell and then formats it as a 6-character number with leading zeros. That's easily handled. Now, if you look at the data in column E, it looks like we're looking at similar numbers. However, some of these have letters in them. And if we were to take that formula, in fact, we could take all these formulas and simply, using the Control key, copy them over here into column F, and that means these formulas will deal with column E. But look what happens. It doesn't handle these when we've got text in them. In other words, we're trying to convert these numbers into a different kind of display this way. So there's a different approach here. And it involves the use of another function that you might or might not have seen. It's called rept, meaning repeat. Now, when I show you this first example, you might be saying, why would I ever use that? And that doesn't seem to be appropriate here. Suppose you wanted to put text. Now, it could be any character on the keyboard, of course. Maybe it's this X out here. Suppose you'd like to repeat that a number of times in this cell. And we've got values over there in column K, so let's just use that. If we're going to be copying this down the column, let's make our K1 reference here be absolute by pressing F4. What are we going to get now? 5 X's. And if we copy this down the column here, we see what we get. And we can use any symbol, and you can use multiple symbols too, sometimes just for a special effect. So if I put in a less than arrow followed by a greater than arrow and press Enter, watch what we see in column H. Again, sort of fun and games and seemingly not exactly relevant, but ultimately it is. This allows us to repeat any character we want. So leaving column F the way it is, but now working in column G and looking at the column E data, let's first begin by introducing another function called len, equals len, meaning length. What's the length of the content of that cell? It's 3 characters. And as we copy this down, we see the others as well. Now that's vital information. Let's say that we want to have leading zeros here. And the problem, remember, is that we've got numbers and a mixture of text and numbers here. And remember, this text doesn't work except in the case of numbers. So we want to cover all bases here. Now what we need to do is calculate the difference between 6 and how many characters we have here. So for example, in this cell right here, it's got a length of 4, so we want 2 leading zeros. So we're going to take 6 minus this len. So let's start by kind of building the formula this way. If we put in 6 minus the length, this is how many leading zeros we need. I'll do this all the way down the column. This is the number of leading zeros that we need. Now, let's plug that into the rept function. Remember, the repeat function says I want to put in a character. What is it? A 0. Double quote, 0, double quote. How many times do we want to put it in there? We want to put it in based on how many zeros we need. And we want to pick up the actual data from E2. So what we should be seeing here is 3 leading zeros and then 757. And that's what we get. And as we double click to copy this down the column, we see what's happening there. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that this is extremely common, what we're doing here, but on the other hand, it gives us more insight into how some of these functions that seemingly come out of nowhere do have some relevance, and we can use them in a variety of different ways. Again, as we look at this, we're using the rept function, think of repeat, to repeat 0 here so that we always are filling in the number of leading zeros that we need. We're taking 6 minus the number of characters that are already there. And so this puts in the leading zeros, and then we put in the actual content of the cell over in column E from the data there. And you see how this is being built. So using these different functions, we've just seen how to use text and rept and also the len function to clean up some data.